My name is Harper, and I'm 43 years old. That Christmas morning, I finally realized my family didn't see me as one of their own. For as long as I can remember, Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. Not because of the decorations, the lights, or even the presents, but because it used to be when my family felt closest. After my husband, Daniel, passed away 5 years ago, I made it my mission to keep that warmth alive. I'd wake up early, play the same carols we used to dance to in the kitchen, and cook the meals that made our house smell like love itself. This year, I wanted it to be special, my first Christmas where I felt strong again, not broken. I spent weeks preparing. I decorated every corner of the house, even climbed a ladder to hang the star at the top of the tree myself. I baked everyone's favorite desserts, Maura's pecan pie, Trent's cranberry loaf, and my children's chocolate fudge brownies. I wrapped gifts in gold paper and tied each one with satin ribbons. Everything was perfect, or at least, I thought it would be. When the doorbell rang, I rushed to open it, smiling despite the winter chill. My sister Maura was first. She walked in with her husband and 2 kids, both glued to their phones. No hugs, no Merry Christmas, just a half smile and a comment about how cold it was. I looked at her hands empty. No gifts, no casserole dish, not even a plate of cookies. Then came my brother, Trent, with his wife. They too carried nothing. I brushed it off, telling myself they might have left the gifts in the car, but the car stayed parked, untouched. As everyone settled in, I felt something strange. The laughter I used to hear so freely was gone. Conversations revolved around who bought what this year, who got a new car, who went on vacation. When my daughter Emma tried to bring up a Christmas memory of her father, Maura interrupted her to show everyone her son's new smartwatch. I forced myself to stay cheerful. I served dinner, filled their plates, and poured wine, the same bottles Daniel had collected years ago. They ate heartily, barely acknowledging the effort. My nephew even asked if there was any soda because the wine was too dry. I wanted to believe it was just casual rudeness. But when it came time for gifts, the truth hit me. They sat in the living room, surrounded by the gifts I had bought, expensive ones, thoughtful ones, and tore into them like scavengers. Not one person had a gift for me. Not a card, not a candle, not even a thank you. I sat there, smiling through the ache, watching Maura's daughter complain that her sweater wasn't the color she wanted. My son Cole caught my eye across the room. His face was tight with embarrassment, anger even. He could see what I saw, the complete lack of gratitude. When the evening ended, they didn't even help clean up. They took leftovers, wine bottles, and cookies for the road as if it were their right. I hugged each of them goodbye, pretending not to notice how quickly they hurried out the door. After the last car left, silence filled the house. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and half-empty glasses. The fireplace flickered, reflecting in the ornaments that had once symbolized family love. That's when I realized something painful yet liberating. My family didn't value me, they valued what I gave them. I'd spent years mistaking obligation for love. I'd carried this family on my back, never asking for anything in return, thinking that kindness would earn loyalty. But that night, I saw their true colors. I cleaned in silence, every dish clinking like punctuation marks to a lesson I should have learned long ago. Emma came downstairs quietly and wrapped her arms around me. "Mom," she said, "you don't deserve this." I nodded but said nothing. The tears that welled up weren't just from hurt, they were from clarity. Something in me hardened that night. The warmth that had always driven me to give and forgive was replaced by a calm, cold resolve. I realized love shouldn't have to be bought or proven through gifts. I had spent years giving to people who didn't even know the meaning of giving back. As I blew out the last candle on the mantel, I made a silent promise to myself that things would change. That Christmas morning, as they tore open my gifts with greedy hands, I silently decided this would be the last time they took from me. After everyone left, I sat alone among crumpled wrapping paper and cold dishes, realizing no one had even said thank you. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater and the ticking of the old clock Daniel had restored years ago. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and roast turkey, but it didn't comfort me the way it used to. I wandered into the living room and looked around. Wrapping paper was still scattered on the floor, a few empty glasses left half full on the coffee table. It looked like a battlefield of indulgence and carelessness. I sat down on the couch, staring at the mess. The more I looked, the clearer it became no one had thanked me for anything. Not for the dinner, the gifts, the decorations, the effort. Nothing. It was as if kindness had become invisible to them. I remembered how different it used to be when Daniel was alive. He had a way of bringing everyone together, making sure every guest felt appreciated. He'd pour wine, tell stories, and never let anyone leave without a smile. But since he passed, something had shifted in my family. My siblings no longer saw me as Harper, the sister or the woman who had shared laughter and childhood memories with them. They saw me as Harper, the host, the one with the big house, the good wine, the money. It wasn't the first time they'd taken advantage, but this was the first time it stung so deeply. There had been hints before. Trent had borrowed money several times, always with the promise to pay it back. He never did. Maura once asked if I could help pay for her daughter's college application fees. I did it gladly, thinking that was what family was for. But this Christmas, it wasn't about money, it was about meaning. They hadn't just failed to bring gifts, they had failed to bring gratitude. Emma and Cole joined me later in the morning. Emma started cleaning up quietly, while Cole gathered the leftover wrapping paper. They didn't say much, but I could see the same disappointment in their eyes. "You do too much for them," Cole finally said. "They take you for granted." His voice was calm but firm, the way Daniel's used to be when he was right about something. "They're family," I said softly, as if that word still held power. "Family doesn't make you feel small, Mom," Emma said. Her words landed like truth I couldn't deny. After they left for the day, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started reflecting. My mind wandered through years of birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. I remembered every time I'd stepped in to help, every time I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. And in all those memories, I couldn't recall one single moment when they had done the same for me. I thought about my parents, how they used to tell us that family is the only treasure that never loses value. But maybe, I thought, that only applies when everyone treasures it equally. The imbalance had been there for years, I'd just been too blind to see it. That evening, I called Maura to check in. She answered cheerfully, clearly not realizing how hurt I'd been. "Oh, Harper, thanks again for hosting. Everything was lovely," she said, her tone breezy. I waited for more, for even a hint of remorse or appreciation, but that was it. No mention of not bringing anything, no apology, just convenience. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," I replied quietly. "Did the kids like their gifts?" "Oh, they loved them," she said. "Although I think Lily wanted a different color sweater, but she'll survive. You always get such nice things." That was all. A compliment about the things, not the thought. When I hung up, I realized something chilling. My family loved what I gave, not who I was. That night, I sat in Daniel's old study, surrounded by the books he loved, and the silence that used to comfort me. I took out my journal and wrote everything I was feeling, the disappointment, the anger, the awakening. The more I wrote, the lighter I felt, but also the more determined. For years, I had been the giver. I had believed that love meant sacrifice. But what good is sacrifice when no one values it? I looked at the framed photo of Daniel and me on the desk. His smile, frozen in time, reminded me of how he used to say, "You can't pour from an empty cup, Harper." I finally understood what he meant. That night, I decided to stop giving until I knew who truly cared for me. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but I knew it was the start of something new, a boundary I should have set long ago. The world outside was quiet, blanketed in snow. The Christmas lights still twinkled faintly through the window, but they didn't look magical anymore. They looked like reminders, bright, but cold. For the first time, I asked myself, do they even deserve the inheritance I worked my whole life to build? My house wasn't just a home, it was the legacy my husband and I built together from nothing. When Daniel and I first bought this property 20 years ago, it was nothing more than a crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The roof leaked, the floors creaked, and the walls were barely standing. But Daniel had looked at it the way he looked at me, with vision and faith. Together, we rebuilt it piece by piece. Every wall carried our laughter, every window framed a memory. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of our perseverance, our love, and our shared dream. After he passed, it became my sanctuary. I poured myself into maintaining it the way he would have wanted. The garden he planted in the backyard still bloomed every spring, and the small wooden cabin by the lake, which we'd built as a summer retreat, still stood strong. Every inch of this place carried the weight of our story. To me, it was sacred, but to my family, it was an asset. Over the years, my siblings had made subtle remarks that I brushed off at the time. Trent would joke at family dinners, "When you're tired of managing all this, Harper, just sign the place over to me, I'll take good care of it." Maura would say things like, "I told the kids they'll get to play by your lake one day when they're older." Their tone had always been light, playful. But I could hear the undertones. They were already claiming pieces of my life before I was even gone. I ignored it, choosing peace over confrontation. But now, after that Christmas, those comments echoed in my head differently. They weren't harmless, they were revealing. The truth was, they didn't see what Daniel and I had built as something sacred. They saw it as something waiting to be inherited. I never used to think about my will. Daniel and I had set up basic documents years ago, splitting everything between our two children. But after he died, and after that cold, giftless Christmas, I began to wonder, what if my siblings believed they had a share too? What if deep down they were just waiting for their turn to benefit? The thought made my stomach turn. I started going through my financial papers. The house, the cabin, my savings, my small business shares, all of it added up to more than I'd realized. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for people to start circling like vultures once they knew it existed. I didn't want that kind of legacy. I didn't want my death to bring out the worst in people I once loved. Emma came over that weekend to help me reorganize some things. As she went through old boxes, she found an envelope labeled "Will and Estate." "Mom," she said carefully, "have you thought about updating this?" I hesitated before answering. "I'm starting to," I admitted. She nodded, sensing there was more on my mind but not pushing. Emma always had Daniel's calmness about her. "Dad always said you can tell who really loves you by how they act when money's involved," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. He was right. After she left, I sat down at my desk and wrote in my journal again. I needed to process the strange mix of anger and resolve growing inside me. For years, I had seen myself as the caretaker, the provider, the glue that held everyone together. But what had it cost me? A lifetime of being taken for granted. That night, I made a list, a brutally honest one. On one side, I wrote down everyone I'd given to over the years. On the other, what they'd given back. The imbalance was staggering. My siblings had taken the most and given the least. Rosa, my housekeeper, had done the opposite. She treated me with kindness, loyalty, and genuine care. My neighbor, June, had checked on me after Daniel's death every single week, and my children, despite growing up surrounded by family greed, had managed to stay grounded and compassionate. That list became my compass. I knew that when the time came, it would guide me to make the right decision. I wasn't going to let guilt or obligation decide who got what. Family, I realized, wasn't just about blood, it was about behavior, and my siblings had shown me exactly who they were. In the weeks that followed, I kept replaying one particular moment in my mind. The way Trent's eyes had scanned the house during Christmas dinner. The way Maura's tone changed whenever money came up. I'd spent years pretending not to notice, but this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I started quietly organizing my documents and thinking about what Daniel would have wanted. He used to tell me, "You can't control how people treat you, Harper, but you can control what you leave behind." He was right. My legacy would not be one of entitlement, it would be one of intention. I didn't want my siblings to destroy the meaning of what Daniel and I built. So I made a decision. one that filled me with both peace and power. I was going to find out, once and for all, who truly valued me, not for what I had, but for who I was. And once I knew that, I would decide who deserved to inherit my life's work. I made a promise to myself that day. The ones who gave nothing would inherit exactly that. For months after Christmas, I became a silent observer of my family's true selves. I didn't tell anyone about my decision. I didn't announce any changes or confront anyone. Instead, I stepped back and watched. I wanted to see how my family behaved when I stopped giving. I wanted to know if they came around for love or for what they could take. The first test came naturally. Trent called one afternoon in February, his voice unusually warm. "Hey, Harper," he said casually. "You wouldn't happen to have a few thousand lying around, would you? My truck needs repairs, and I'm short this month." His tone was so nonchalant it almost made me laugh. I told him gently that I couldn't help this time. There was a long pause before he replied, "Oh, well, I guess I'll figure it out." The warmth in his voice vanished. A week later, Maura called. She wanted to know if I'd help pay for her son's educational trip to Europe. I told her the same thing, that I wasn't in a position to help. She sighed dramatically. "You used to be so generous, Harper. What happened to you?" I wanted to say, "You happened to me." But instead, I just smiled to myself and said, "I guess I've learned to prioritize differently." That was the beginning of their distance. Calls grew less frequent. Invitations stopped coming. When I used to be the one hosting dinners, everyone made time. But when I didn't offer, no one stepped forward to invite me. I wasn't surprised. Still, I watched in silence, recording every interaction in my journal. I wrote down who reached out, what they said, and how they acted when I had nothing to offer. It became my own little experiment in human nature, and the results were painfully clear. My siblings cared about access, not affection. My children, however, were different. Emma called every evening just to check on me, even when she was busy with work. Cole came by on weekends, fixing small things around the house without being asked. They didn't bring expensive gifts or grand gestures. They brought time. They brought presence. And in that simplicity, I found comfort. One cold March morning, I came downstairs to find Rosa, my housekeeper, already in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. She'd brought me homemade tamales and a jar of soup for the week. When I thanked her, she brushed it off with a laugh. "You take care of everyone, Mrs. Harper," she said. "It's my turn sometimes." Her words stayed with me. That kind of kindness, unprompted, genuine, was worth more than anything I'd ever received from my own siblings. My neighbor June was the same. She was a retired teacher who lived alone down the road, and every week she'd drop by with tea and gossip about the neighborhood. She never asked for anything, never overstepped. She simply cared. That spring, when my garden started to bloom again, I found myself spending more time outdoors. The flowers Daniel and I had planted together came alive: lilies, tulips, roses. I tended them with quiet joy, realizing how much peace there is in solitude when it's chosen, not forced. Sometimes, as I watered the plants, I'd think about how blind I'd been all those years. I'd spent so much time chasing approval from people who didn't value me that I'd overlooked the ones who did. I used to think my siblings' opinions mattered most. That being the reliable one made me loved. But love built on usefulness isn't love at all, it's dependence disguised as affection. Once I stopped giving, their true colors bled through. They didn't visit. They didn't call. Not even to ask how I was. And that silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. I started to see my family dynamics clearly for the first time. Maura and Trent had always taken from others, not just me. It was how they lived. They saw generosity as weakness and family as an opportunity. I had mistaken their greed for closeness. The realization hurt, but it also freed me. I didn't have to keep proving my worth through giving. I didn't owe anyone access to my peace. My children, Rosa and June, they were my true circle now. That summer, I decided to take things further. I began documenting everything, not just their actions, but my emotions. If I was going to make life-changing decisions about my inheritance, I wanted the record to be clear. My lawyer Mark once told me, "Write everything down. Truth is easiest to prove when it's written in your own hand." So I did. I wrote about how Maura had stopped returning my calls, how Trent had unfriended me on social media after I refused to help him financially, and how not one of them reached out on my birthday that spring. Every page became a mirror of truth. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And honesty, I realized, was the foundation of justice. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted fairness. And to achieve that, I needed clarity first. Watching them from a distance gave me exactly that. By June, I no longer felt angry. I just felt done. I had observed long enough to understand what kind of people they were. I had always believed blood made family, but I was about to prove myself wrong. When I sat down with my lawyer, Mark, he said 6 words that changed everything. "You can leave your legacy anywhere." I still remember that morning clearly, the smell of old paper and leather that filled Mark's office. The way sunlight streamed through the blinds, striping the mahogany desk with gold. I'd known Mark for years. He was more than just my attorney. He was Daniel's close friend and the one who'd helped us set up our first will. When Daniel passed, it was Mark who handled everything with quiet dignity. So, when I finally decided to change my will, he was the only person I trusted. "You seem different," he said as I sat down. "More certain about something." I smiled faintly. "I've had some clarity lately," I replied. "I've been doing a lot of watching." He raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. I told him about Christmas, about my family's behavior, about the months that followed. I didn't hold back. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm but knowing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Harper," he said, "you have every right to decide who inherits your estate. Legally and morally, the idea that blood automatically deserves inheritance is one of society's most persistent myths." His tone was matter of fact, but his words struck something deep in me. He explained how many clients felt trapped by guilt, leaving fortunes to relatives who had long stopped caring. "You can leave your legacy anywhere," he said. "It can go to your children, your friends, charities, whoever reflects your values." I sat quietly for a moment, letting those words sink in. Legacy anywhere. The idea felt liberating. For so long, I'd felt bound by invisible chains, the expectation that family was sacred no matter how they behaved. But sitting there, I realized legacy wasn't about blood. It was about worthiness. "I don't want to make decisions out of anger," I told him. "Then don't," Mark said. "Make them out of truth. You've seen who shows up for you, Harper. That's all the evidence you need." He was right. I didn't want to punish anyone. I just wanted to honor those who had truly loved me. We spent hours going through my estate, my home, the cabin, my savings, and Daniel's life insurance investments that had matured. I was surprised at how much it amounted to. Mark smiled slightly when he saw my reaction. "You and Daniel built something strong. Don't let the wrong people tear it apart when you're gone." We drafted a temporary will that divided everything equally among my 2 children and my siblings. It was only a placeholder, a test of sorts. Mark didn't question my intent, he knew I was planning something. I told him I wanted time to think, to observe, to make sure my final decisions were guided by truth. He nodded. "You have that right. But remember, intentions mean little if they're not protected legally. When you're ready, we'll make it final." I promised him I would be. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. "You can leave your legacy anywhere." Those words became a mantra. I started looking at my life differently. Every interaction, every person I knew, I began to ask myself, if I were gone tomorrow, would I want them to hold a piece of what I've built? It was a powerful question. The answer came easily for some: Emma, Cole, Rosa, and June. But for others, Maura, Trent, the answer was painfully clear. No. Still, I didn't want to make hasty choices. I wanted to give them one last chance to show their true nature. If there was any good left in them, I wanted to see it before I closed that door forever. So, I told Mark my plan. I'd test them. Not with words, but with actions. I'd host another gathering soon and mention casually that I was considering donating part of my estate to charity. I wanted to see how they reacted. Mark gave a small, knowing smile. That will tell you everything you need to know. He helped me organize everything legally so that when I was ready, I could finalize the will in a single day. Every detail would be documented, every signature witnessed. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control, not vengeful, just deliberate. On my way home, I stopped by Daniel's grave. The ground was still damp from the morning rain, and the air was cool. Almost cleansing. I knelt beside his headstone and brushed away a few fallen leaves. "You'd tell me to trust my instincts," I whispered. "So I am." The wind rustled the trees as if he were answering. I smiled, standing up, feeling his presence beside me. That night, I sat in my study and wrote down my plan in detail. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And if the truth meant that my family would lose their inheritance, so be it. They had made their choices long before I made mine. By the time spring arrived, I already knew who would fail the test. I hosted a family dinner, pretending it was casual, but every word and gesture that night was part of my plan. By late April, the weather had begun to warm, and the air carried that soft, fragrant promise of spring. It seemed like the perfect time to gather my family again to see if anything about them had changed since Christmas. I spent the morning preparing a simple dinner. No extravagance this time, no table bursting with expensive food or imported wine. Just a roast chicken, fresh bread, a few salads, and a pie I'd baked myself. It wasn't about the food, it was about what I'd see in their eyes when I told them my little piece of news. When Trent arrived, he came empty-handed again, though this time with forced enthusiasm. "Wow, Harper, still keeping up with all this cooking, huh?" he said, giving the kitchen a sweeping look. I smiled politely. "It keeps me busy," I replied. Maura came next, her voice sugary sweet, her perfume clouding the air before she even stepped through the door. "Oh, it smells amazing in here. I brought some, well, just me tonight. Hope that's okay," she chirped. I could feel Emma's silent eye roll from across the room. My children had agreed to play along, though they both knew what I was planning. As everyone sat down to eat, conversation started, light small talk about work, the weather, the latest TV shows. It was all shallow noise. I waited for the right moment, sipping my wine slowly, watching how comfortably they slipped into their roles. The takers, the charmers, the self-absorbed. Then, as plates began to empty, I leaned forward and said, "I've been thinking a lot about my will lately." The room went still. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Trent chuckled nervously. "You're too young to be talking about that, Harper," he said. "I'm 43, not immortal," I replied with a small smile. "And besides, it's just something responsible people do." Maura tilted her head, feigning interest. "What brought this up?" she asked carefully. I shrugged. "Perspective, I guess. I've been thinking, maybe instead of leaving everything to family, I could do something different. Maybe start a charitable foundation. Something that gives back." The shift in energy was immediate. Emma stayed silent, pretending to focus on her plate. Cole's eyes flickered to me, suppressing a smile. Trent's fork froze mid-air. "Wait, like a charity?" he asked, his tone cautious. "For what?" "For women rebuilding their lives after loss," I said softly. Like I had to. I think Daniel would have liked that. Maura let out a small laugh, forced and brittle. "That's lovely, Harper, really. But don't you think family should come first? I mean, we've all got kids to think about." Her words were laced with the same entitlement I'd heard all my life. "Oh, of course," I said mildly. "But charity begins at home, doesn't it? Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong, confusing giving with enabling." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Trent leaned forward, trying to sound supportive. Well, I think giving is great, but family is your legacy. I mean, wouldn't it be sad if your hard work went to strangers? His words were smooth, but I saw the calculation behind them. He wasn't worried about my legacy, he was worried about losing his cut of it. The air grew thick with discomfort. I smiled as if I hadn't noticed and changed the subject to something mundane, pretending the conversation hadn't affected me. But I noticed every glance exchanged across that table, every flicker of greed that surfaced in their eyes. Emma caught my gaze once and gave a subtle nod. She saw it too. After dessert, everyone started making excuses to leave. Trent said he had to wake up early, and Maura mentioned her daughter's soccer practice. Neither offered to help clean up. As they put on their coats, Maura turned to me with a forced smile. Harper, don't do anything drastic. We all love you and just want you to be happy. I could hear the fear behind her sweetness. I appreciate that, I said, handing her a small container of leftovers. She took it without a word of thanks. When the door finally closed, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of their cars pulling away. The house grew quiet again, the way it always did after they left. But this time, the silence wasn't lonely, it was revealing. I walked back into the dining room and looked around at the empty plates, the chairs still slightly askew. That table had been my test field, and I'd gotten all the answers I needed. Later that night, I called Mark. You were right, I said as soon as he picked up. I know who they are now. So you're ready to finalize? He asked. Not yet, I said. I want to write letters first. I want the truth to come from me. Letters? He repeated. For them? For everyone, I said. For the ones who gave and for the ones who didn't. He paused, then said, You're making peace in your own way. I smiled. Something like that. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a new journal. I began drafting letters, one for each person who had shaped my life. For better or worse. Some would hold gratitude. Others, nothing at all. The ink flowed easily, guided by memory and clarity. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming power I'd given away for years. I realized my revenge wouldn't be loud, it would be written in silence and sealed in an envelope. Once rumors spread that I might give money to charity, my family turned into vultures. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Less than a week after that dinner, I noticed the sudden shift in tone whenever Trent or Maura called. Before, they rarely reached out now. I was getting texts every few days. Just checking in, sis. How are you holding up? Thinking about you lately, Harper. We should get lunch soon. It was almost comical. The timing couldn't have been more obvious. The charity conversation had struck a nerve and now, they were scrambling to fix their images before it was too late. I played along, polite as ever, replying with short but kind messages. I wanted to see just how far their sudden concern would go. The first to show up unannounced was Trent. One afternoon, I was pruning roses in the garden when his car pulled up. He stepped out holding a paper bag. Brought you some coffee, he said. Smiling a little too wide. I raised an eyebrow but thanked him. It was almost touching if I didn't know better. We sat on the porch, sipping coffee in awkward silence until he finally spoke. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. He began. About donating to charity. I just wanted to say, I get it. You've got a big heart, Harper. Always have. I nodded. Thank you. He cleared his throat. But I also think family can do a lot of good too, Like, if you helped me with my new business, I could employ people, maybe even donate myself. There it was, the pitch. I see, I said softly, keeping my tone neutral. He leaned forward, eager. It's a tech startup, real potential. You'd double your investment in a year. It could even be part of your legacy. I smiled politely, though inside, I was sickened by the performance. I'll think about it, I said. He grinned, relieved. That's all I ask, sis. When he left, I watched his car disappear down the road and whispered to myself, You just wrote your own letter. 2 days later, Maura called. Her voice was dripping with sweetness, the kind that made my skin crawl. Harper, I've been meaning to tell you, you're such an inspiration. Honestly, I don't know how you do it all. I nearly laughed. That's kind of you to say, I replied, pretending not to hear the strain in her voice. You know, she continued, I've been organizing this fundraiser for my daughter's school so exhausting. I thought maybe you'd like to help sponsor it? It's for the arts, and I know how much you love supporting good causes. I paused, pretending to think. I'm focusing on other causes right now, I said gently. There was a short silence on the other end before she said, Oh, of course. I just thought, since you mentioned giving, it might be nice to keep it in the family. There it was again, the assumption that family deserved first dibs on my generosity. Maybe next time, I said, my voice calm but final. After that call, things got more interesting. I started hearing from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins, distant aunts, even a nephew who suddenly wanted to reconnect. They all had the same undertone in their messages. Friendly curiosity mixed with hidden expectation. The air of desperation was almost palpable. Meanwhile, Emma and Cole noticed the change too. They're circling, Mom, Cole said one evening as we sat in the living room. You can practically smell the greed. I chuckled. Let them circle. They'll show themselves soon enough. You're really going through with this, aren't you? You're actually going to cut them out? I looked at her, seeing both concern and admiration in her eyes. I'm not cutting anyone out, I said. They're cutting themselves out. I'm just watching. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself: calls, favors, false flattery. Every move they made confirmed what I already knew. They didn't care about me, they cared about what I had. But what they didn't know was that my lawyer and I were documenting everything. Every visit, every conversation, every promise they made was written down and time-stamped. If anyone ever tried to contest my will later, the truth would stand like concrete. One afternoon, Rosa came into the study and found me sorting through my notes. You look serious today, she said, setting down a cup of tea beside me. I smiled faintly. Just organizing my thoughts. You're writing a book? She teased. Something like that, I said. A story about people who don't know their characters yet. Rosa laughed softly, but I wasn't joking. I was building a record not just of my estate, but of the lessons life had forced me to learn. Watching my family scramble to play nice reminded me of an old saying Daniel used to quote, "When you stop feeding someone's greed, they start starving for your approval." That's exactly what was happening. They weren't just losing access to my money, they were losing access to the version of me that made their lives easier, and they couldn't handle it. By mid-May, I had seen enough. I knew who would stand by me if I had nothing, and who would vanish the second I stopped giving. The line between the two was so sharp it almost glowed. My siblings had failed every test, and they didn't even realize they were being graded. They thought they were playing me, but I was writing their fate. On my 44th birthday, I threw a party just to see who came for love, and who came for gain. My birthday had always been a quiet affair. Ever since Daniel passed, I'd preferred a small dinner or a walk by the lake over grand celebrations. But that year, I decided to do something different. It wasn't about celebration, it was about confirmation. After months of observing my family's greed, I wanted one more chance to look each of them in the eye and see whether any part of them still had genuine love left for me. So I planned a modest get-together at my house. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. I made the invitations myself, handwritten notes delivered by mail, not texts or evites. I wanted to see who would make the effort to come and who wouldn't bother. I cooked everything from scratch, simple dishes that Daniel used to love: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, and apple pie. I set the table with soft lighting, fresh flowers, and a playlist of songs that always brought peace to my heart. Emma and Cole arrived early to help. You sure about this? Emma asked as she set the plates. I'm sure, I said. Tonight I'm not the host, I'm the observer. Around 6, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Maura standing there, smiling in that overly rehearsed way that made my skin tighten. Happy birthday, she said, stepping in with her husband and kids. Sorry, didn't have time to grab a gift, but you know how it is, life's crazy. I nodded. Of course. Come in. No gift, no card, just excuses. As she walked past, I noticed her eyes scanning the living room, lingering on the new painting I'd hung recently. Nice piece, she commented. Must have cost a fortune. It was a gift, I said evenly. From June. Her face twitched slightly before she turned away. Next came Trent. He walked in holding an envelope, grinning. I thanked him, and he quickly added, Don't get too excited, it's not a present, it's an idea. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a printed business proposal for his new company, with a note at the bottom that read, Would love your investment, consider it part of your legacy. I looked up at him slowly, my smile steady but my chest burning. That's thoughtful, I said. You always think ahead. It's what I do, he said, laughing awkwardly. As the evening went on, the guests mingled. There was laughter, yes, but it was hollow. I watched Maura steer conversations toward money, vacations, and property. I saw Trent trying to charm Cole, probably hoping my son would influence me later. My real friends, Rosa and June, arrived quietly, bringing homemade food and small, heartfelt gifts. Rosa handed me a simple box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a hand-stitched apron with the words, Made with Love, embroidered across it. June brought a framed photo of the lake cabin Daniel and I had built together, taken from her garden last summer. When I saw it, something inside me softened. Those were gifts that meant something. Emma and Cole gave me a photo album filled with pictures from the years after Daniel's death, little moments I'd forgotten. Me laughing at dinner, me helping Cole move into college, me holding Emma's newborn niece. Each photo had a handwritten caption. You kept us strong. It brought tears to my eyes. The contrast between what they gave and what my siblings didn't was almost poetic. As the night wore on, I noticed something strange. Maura and Trent seemed irritated that Rosa and June were there. They exchanged whispers, casting sidelong glances at them. It was subtle, but I saw it. They couldn't stand that the people they saw as beneath them were part of my circle. Later, while I was clearing dishes, I overheard Maura in the hallway talking to Trent. You think she's serious about cutting us out? She whispered. She's too sentimental for that, he said dismissively. She just needs to feel powerful. Once she calms down, everything will go back to normal. You'll see. My stomach turned. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was weak. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway as if I hadn't heard a thing. Coffee, anyone? I asked sweetly. They froze for a moment before Maura forced a smile. Oh sure, that'd be lovely. I poured coffee for everyone. My hands steady, though my heart was racing. I realized in that moment that this night wasn't just a test, it was a verdict. When the guests began to leave, I hugged Rosa and June tightly, thanking them for coming. Maura offered a half-hearted hug, muttering something about her early morning. Trent gave me a wink. Think about that proposal, yeah? Could be your best birthday decision yet. I'll sleep on it, I replied. When the door finally closed, I exhaled deeply. The house was quiet again, filled only with the faint sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Emma came to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. You okay, Mom? She asked. I nodded slowly. I am, I said. More than ever. I looked at the photo album on the table, at the framed picture of the cabin, at the apron Rosa had made. The difference between sincerity and greed had never been clearer. The next morning, I called Mark and scheduled an appointment for the following week. It was time to make everything official. I'd seen all I needed to see. My birthday had shown me who celebrated my life and who only calculated its worth. After that night, I stopped reaching out completely and the silence spoke volumes. Once my birthday passed, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't initiate a single call, message, or visit. No reminders, no check-ins, no invitations. If anyone wanted to see me, they'd have to make the effort. I wanted to see who came around when there was nothing left to gain. The weeks that followed were eerily calm. The phone stayed silent. No texts from Trent. The absence was so absolute it almost felt deliberate. But instead of hurting, it gave me a strange sense of peace. I had always filled the silence with noise calls, gifts, hospitality. Now I let the quiet stretch and fill the house like sunlight through open curtains. It felt honest. The first person to break the silence wasn't family, it was June. She dropped by one Sunday afternoon with a jar of homemade jam. "Haven't seen you in a bit," she said, smiling as she set it down on my kitchen counter. "Thought I'd make sure you're not hiding from the world." I laughed. "Maybe just hiding from certain parts of it." "Smart woman," she said, pouring us both tea. "People show their true colors when you stop painting the picture for them." Her words stayed with me. That's exactly what was happening. I'd stopped maintaining the illusion of closeness, and the distance revealed the truth. The people who loved me showed up naturally. The rest stayed gone. Emma and Cole came by every weekend without fail. They didn't need reminders, they just came. We spent long afternoons cooking, gardening, and watching old movies. The laughter we shared was real, easy, unburdened by expectation. For the first time in years, I felt like a mother again, not a provider holding everyone else together. One afternoon in June, Cole helped me fix the fence around the garden. As he hammered the last nail, he said, "You know, Mom, I think peace suits you." I smiled. "It feels strange," I admitted. "After years of chaos, peace almost feels suspicious," he chuckled. "Then I guess you've had the wrong kind of people around for too long." He was right. I thought about all the times I'd mistaken drama for connection, obligation for love. Now that it was gone, my life finally felt like my own. Rosa continued to visit too, bringing laughter and warmth into my days. She treated me not as an employer but as family. Once, when I thanked her for always checking in, she shrugged and said, "Kindness doesn't cost anything, Mrs. Harper. Some people just don't know how to spend it." I wrote that line in my journal later that night. It was a truth worth remembering. Summer moved slowly, beautifully. I spent mornings tending to Daniel's garden, afternoons reading by the lake cabin. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before his death. Each stroke of the brush felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd buried beneath years of caretaking. The colors, soft greens, golds, and blues mirrored how I felt, calm, alive, free. But the peace also brought clarity. Without the distraction of noise and manipulation, I could finally see how deeply my family's greed had wounded me. It wasn't about money. It was about being invisible, about giving, and never being seen in return. I had let them drain me for years, mistaking their need for love. Now, with the silence between us, I could finally hear my own thoughts again. In July, I checked my phone one morning and saw a missed call from Maura. No voicemail, no text. Just a single missed call, like a ghost tapping on the door. She didn't try again. I didn't return it. I knew it wasn't out of love, it was out of curiosity. She was waiting to see if I'd chase her like always. But I didn't. A week later, Trent posted photos online of a new car he'd bought. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." I almost laughed. He'd probably borrowed money from someone else. They both moved on, pretending I didn't exist. And in their absence, my life became infinitely lighter. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea, watching the sun dip below the trees. The quiet would stretch for miles, and I'd feel Daniel's presence in it. He used to love peaceful moments like this. I could almost hear him saying, "You don't owe anyone your joy, Harper." I smiled every time I thought of that. By August, the silence had turned from test to confirmation. I didn't need to watch anymore. I knew who my people were, and none of them shared my blood except for my children. I was finally ready to make the final changes. My will, my letters, my legacy, it was time to set everything in motion. I called Mark and scheduled a meeting for September. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll have everything ready." The summer closed softly, with golden sunsets and quiet mornings. My home felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years, not lonely, just content. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness had burned away, leaving only clarity. I looked out at the lake one evening, the water shimmering with the last light of day, and realized something simple but profound. Peace wasn't something you found, it was something you created by removing the wrong people. By the time autumn arrived, I had no more guilt, only clarity. When word spread that I'd fallen ill, they came running but not for love. It was late September when I caught a bad case of the flu. Nothing serious, but it knocked me down for a week. Emma and Cole took turns checking in on me, bringing soup, medicine, and plenty of care. Rosa insisted on stopping by daily, fussing over me like a mother hen. I told her she didn't have to, but she only laughed. "You took care of everyone else for years," she said. "Now it's our turn." Her kindness warmed me more than the tea she made. For a while, I didn't think much of it until Trent found out. He must have heard through Maura, or one of Emma's social media posts. 2 days after I started feeling better, he called out of nowhere. "Hey Harper, heard you were under the weather," he said, his voice filled with exaggerated concern. "I'm fine now," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just a little flu." "Well, you've got to take care of yourself," he said, pausing. "You know, it really got me thinking. You've been alone in that big house all this time. Maybe you should consider letting someone help you manage things." I smiled faintly. "Manage things?" "Yeah, bills, maintenance, that kind of stuff. You've always been the organized one, but it might be time to start thinking ahead. You could use a little help." His words were coated in sugar, but the message underneath was sour. He was circling again, trying to insert himself where he didn't belong. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, "but I've got everything under control." Of course," he said quickly. "Just looking out for you, sis." After we hung up, I knew it wouldn't end there. And I was right. The next day, Maura called. Her tone was dripping with forced sweetness. "Harper, I just heard you were sick. Are you okay, dear?" "I'm fine now," I said. "It was just a little flu." "Oh, good," she said with relief that sounded too rehearsed. "You know, it made me realize how fragile life is. You never know what could happen." I was actually going to call and ask, "Have you updated your will recently?" I nearly dropped my teacup. She tried to sound casual, but the greed underneath was transparent. "Why do you ask?" I said evenly. "Oh, no reason," she said too quickly. "Just, you've been talking about donating things, and I thought maybe we could all sit down and discuss family matters like adults. Make sure things are fair, you know?" I almost laughed. Fair. The word didn't belong in her mouth. "Everything's already taken care of," I said softly. "You don't have to worry about a thing." "Oh, good," she said, her voice tight. "I just wanted to make sure you're thinking clearly these days." I hung up soon after, my patience wearing thin. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I'd been sick for less than a week, and they were already thinking about my will. I didn't need to test them anymore, they were exposing themselves all on their own. That evening, as I sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket, Emma arrived with a basket of groceries. "You look better," she said, smiling as she put things away. "I am," I said. "Your aunt and uncle seem suddenly concerned about my health, though." She rolled her eyes. "Let me guess, talk of wills?" "Bingo," I said with a wry laugh. "You'd think I was on my deathbed." "They only care about what you leave behind," she said, her voice firm. "But they don't realize the best part of you isn't something they can inherit." I smiled at that. My daughter had Daniel's wisdom. Later that night, I called Mark to tell him what had happened. He listened quietly before saying, "It's time." "You think so?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "They've revealed enough. Let's finalize everything. I'll prepare the paperwork." I agreed without hesitation. The very next week, I went to his office to sign the final documents. We went through everything in meticulous detail. Emma and Cole were listed as my primary beneficiaries. Rosa and June each had a generous sum and specific letters of gratitude. Every other family member, Trent, Maura, and the rest were left with nothing but a statement. I asked Mark to ensure every legal precaution was taken to prevent them from contesting it. "This will hold," he said confidently. "You've documented everything perfectly. They have no grounds to argue." I felt a quiet satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't vengeance, it was balance. I had finally drawn a line between love and exploitation. A week later, Trent and Maura both showed up at my door unannounced. They brought small gifts, a potted plant, a bottle of cheap wine like two actors rehearsing for a play. "Just wanted to check in," Maura said, smiling too brightly. "Make sure you're feeling better." "You shouldn't have," I said, taking the gifts politely. They made small talk for a while, their eyes darting around the room, probably imagining what they thought they'd one day own. Maura commented on my jewelry. Trent asked casually if I'd made any estate decisions. I answered every question with polite vagueness, watching their forced smiles tighten with each deflection. When they finally left, I closed the door behind them and let out a long, shaky breath. I wasn't angry anymore, just disappointed that I'd once called these people my family. I looked at the bottle of wine they'd brought and set it aside unopened. It wasn't an offering, it was an act. A performance of care they thought I'd believe. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had learned that fake concern was just greed wearing a different mask. They left smiling, not realizing they'd just been written out for good. I sat at my desk that night, sealing the letters that would tell the truth after I was gone. It was early October when the final version of my will arrived from Mark's office. I placed the folder on my desk and just stared at it for a long time. The weight of that document wasn't in its pages, it was in what it represented. The end of being taken for granted and the beginning of leaving my life on my own terms. I took a deep breath, sat down, and opened the drawer that held the cream-colored stationery Daniel had bought me on our 10th anniversary. I hadn't used it since his passing. That night, I did. The first letter I wrote was to Emma. My hand trembled as I started. Not from doubt but from emotion. I told her how proud I was of her strength, how she'd carried Grace through loss, and how her compassion had been my greatest comfort. I reminded her to keep that kindness, but to never let anyone use it against her the way I once had. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and pressed my initials into the wax with Daniel's old seal. It felt like blessing her future. The second letter was for Cole. Writing to him brought tears I couldn't stop. He had Daniel's sense of humor and his quiet courage. I told him that being a good man had nothing to do with wealth or inheritance, it was about integrity. I thanked him for protecting me in small ways he didn't even realize. For fixing things around the house, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "You are the best parts of your father," I wrote, "and the parts of me I'm most proud of." Then came Rosa's letter. I wrote to her in Spanish, using the language Daniel had taught me years ago. I told her she wasn't just my housekeeper, she was family. I thanked her for treating me like a person when others treated me like a wallet. I told her that in my will, she would find the means to finally open that small bakery she'd always dreamed of. I smiled as I wrote it, imagining the look on her face when she found out. The next letter was for June. I told her she'd been a blessing wrapped in friendship. Her steady presence and simple kindness had healed me in ways she'd never know. I left her my lake cabin, our quiet refuge, so she could continue to find peace there, the way I once did. "It's yours now," I wrote, "because you loved it, not because you wanted it." Then came the hardest ones. Maura, Trent. For a long time I just stared at the blank page, unsure if they deserved even words. But Mark had told me to write something, if only for closure, so I did. I wrote each of their names at the top, then beneath it, a single line. For Maura, "You brought nothing. You receive the same." For Trent, "Greed is its own inheritance." I sealed both, in envelopes without another word. It wasn't anger that guided me anymore, it was truth. They had written their own endings long ago. All I had done was put it on paper. When all the letters were finished, I arranged them neatly in a box labeled "To be delivered upon my passing." I included a note to Mark with instructions to deliver each one personally. He would ensure they reached the right hands. I sat back in my chair, the firelight flickering softly across the walls. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. My affairs were in order, my legacy defined not by obligation but by meaning. I wasn't bitter anymore. The bitterness had dissolved into quiet understanding. I realized then that revenge isn't always about punishment, it can also be about restoration. Restoring dignity, restoring balance, restoring truth. I glanced around the study, the shelves Daniel built, the books we collected together, the photo of our wedding day. I whispered, "It's done, Daniel. We did it right." I could almost feel him there, proud and smiling. Before going to bed, I wrote one last letter to myself. I titled it, "In Gratitude." In it, I wrote everything I wished someone had told me years ago. That love should never be proven through sacrifice. That peace sometimes requires distance. That being alone can be a sanctuary, not a punishment. And at the bottom, I wrote one final line. "You gave enough, Harper. Now it's time to receive peace." When I sealed that final envelope, I felt something inside me settle. The tension that had lived in my chest for years simply vanished. I wasn't angry, I wasn't resentful. I was free. The next morning, I took the box of letters to Mark's office. He greeted me with his usual calm smile. "So, it's done?" he asked. "It's done," I said firmly. He opened the box, scanning the envelopes. "You've written more than just a will," he said. "You've written your story, maybe," I replied. "But it's one I needed to tell." He locked the box in his office safe, assuring me it would remain untouched until the time came. As I left his office, the autumn wind brushed against my face, cool and clean. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had tied every loose end, spoken every truth, and reclaimed my own peace. For the first time, I could live the rest of my life without looking over my shoulder. The ink was dry, and so was my guilt. When the next Christmas came, I hosted again, but this time, it wasn't for family. The year slipped by quietly, like pages turning in a well-worn book. Autumn faded into winter, and before I knew it, December had returned the season that once brought me both joy and pain. But this year, it felt different. For the first time, there was no dread in the pit of my stomach when I saw twinkling lights on my street or heard the faint hum of carols in the stores. There was only calm. I had spent the year rebuilding myself emotionally, spiritually, even physically. I had decluttered my house, let go of things that carried too much weight, and surrounded myself only with people who brought peace. My circle was smaller now, but it was stronger. And as Christmas approached, I knew I wanted to celebrate it on my own terms. I decided to host a small dinner, just 4 people: Emma, Cole, Rosa, and June. The ones who had loved me without asking for anything in return. I wanted it to be intimate, sincere, and filled with meaning, not material things. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke up to a quiet snowfall blanketing the garden. The world outside looked soft, clean, renewed. I spent the morning cooking roasted duck, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and apple tart for dessert. The house smelled warm and inviting. I put on Daniel's favorite Christmas playlist, and for the first time in years, I didn't cry when his song came on. I just smiled. By evening, the table was set, simple linen, candles, and the same crystal glasses Daniel and I had used every year. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to the sound of laughter. Emma and Cole were first, carrying a basket of homemade bread. Rosa followed, holding a plate of tamales. June arrived last, clutching a small wrapped box and smiling from ear to ear. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she said as she stepped inside. The house came alive that night, not with noise, but with warmth. We ate, talked, and shared memories. Emma told stories from her childhood that had us all laughing. Cole teased me about my overly perfect mashed potatoes. Rosa insisted her tamales were better, and June agreed, saying, "Sorry, Harper, but she might be right." I laughed until my cheeks hurt. It was the kind of laughter I hadn't felt in years, pure, unguarded, real. After dinner, I brought out a small stack of envelopes, tied together with a red ribbon. Each one had a name written on it: Emma, Cole, Rosa, and June. "These are Christmas cards," I said softly. "And a little something for the future." They exchanged surprised glances, unsure of what I meant. "You'll understand when the time comes," I added with a smile. "But for tonight, just know that I love you, all of you." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "You've done too much already, Mrs. Harper." "I'm not doing anything," I said gently. "I'm just giving where it belongs." We spent the rest of the evening by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and listening to carols. There were no lavish gifts, no forced conversations, no tension, just gratitude. I looked around the room, at the faces glowing in the firelight, and felt something deep inside me settle. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation, not expectation, just love freely given. When Emma helped me clear the table later, she looked at me curiously. "You seem at peace, Mom," she said. "I am," I replied. "For the first time in a long mated time." "Even after everything?" she asked. "Especially after everything," I said. "Peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from understanding." She smiled and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," I whispered back. "I'm proud of you too." As the night wound down, I stood by the window, watching snow fall over the garden Daniel and I had once built. The lights twinkled softly against the white drifts. The world outside was quiet, almost sacred. Rosa and June said their goodbyes first, promising to come by in the morning for leftovers. Emma and Cole stayed a little longer, sitting with me by the fire in comfortable silence. When they finally left, the house was still warm with the echo of laughter and love. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft hum of the wind outside. The memories of all the Christmases before, both good and painful, passed through me like ghosts. But instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Every wound had led me here to this moment of peace. For once, I didn't feel the need to fix or prove anything. The people who mattered already knew my heart. The ones who didn't, never would. That realization didn't hurt anymore. It felt like freedom. Before going to bed, I looked at the tree, simple, decorated with only handmade ornaments. At the very top hung the same star Daniel and I had placed there every year. I touched it lightly and whispered, "Merry Christmas, my love." We did it our way this time. That night, I fell asleep without the usual ache in my chest. No tears, no regrets. Just contentment. The next morning the house was filled with sunlight reflecting off the snow, and I could almost hear Daniel's laughter in the air. My heart felt light. I knew that whatever time I had left in this world would be lived in peace. I had finally built a new kind of family, not one born from blood, but from loyalty, love, and gratitude. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had replaced them with real love. When I was gone, my family gathered expecting fortune and received silence instead. I didn't live to see the aftermath of my decisions, but I had imagined it many times, and Mark later told Emma how it all unfolded. It happened on a mild spring afternoon, 6 months after my passing. The air was bright and clear, but the tension inside Mark's office was thick enough to cut with a knife. My family sat in a row of leather chairs, faces somber but eyes gleaming with anticipation. Maura wore black, too dramatic, even for mourning. Trent sat beside her, trying to look serious, though he couldn't stop checking his watch. Emma and Cole were there too, quiet and composed, while Rosa and June sat together at the end of the table, looking unsure of why they'd even been invited. Mark greeted everyone calmly, placing a box on the table. "Before we begin," he said, "Harper wanted me to remind you all that this reading is not just a formality, it's a message. Everything you're about to hear is in her own words." Maura gave a polite, restrained smile. "Of course," she said sweetly. "Harper was always sentimental." Mark ignored the comment and began reading the will. It started with my final words of gratitude to Emma and Cole for being the truest reflection of love I could have ever hoped for. I had left them the house, the investments, and the art collection Daniel and I had built together. Then, He read the part about Rosa. I had left her enough money to start her bakery, along with a note saying, "For the woman who gave me kindness when others only took." Rosa burst into quiet tears, covering her face with her hands. June's gift came next, the lake cabin, along with a small fund to maintain it. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "Oh, Harper." Emma reached over and squeezed her hand. The room was filled with the sound of genuine emotion, at least, from some of them. Maura and Trent exchanged a quick, confused glance. Then, Mark reached for the 2 remaining envelopes. "Harper left letters for both of you," he said, looking at them directly. "She wanted you to read them privately, but she instructed me to summarize the content publicly." Trent leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Sure. Let's hear it." Mark opened the first envelope. "To Maura," he read. "You brought nothing, you receive the same." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Maura's face went pale. "Excuse me?" she said sharply. "That's it?" "That's it," Mark replied. "That was her entire message to you." Trent snorted, half laughing. "Wow, cold, even for Harper." "Your turn," Mark said, opening the next envelope. "To Trent," he read aloud. "Greed is its own inheritance." The smirk disappeared from Trent's face. His jaw tightened. And for once, he had no clever remark. "That can't be legal," Maura snapped. "She can't just— It's completely legal." Mark interrupted, his tone firm. "Harper made her decisions carefully, documented every step, and witnessed every conversation. This will is ironclad." The silence that followed was heavy. Maura's eyes filled with angry tears. Trent looked away, his face red. "She's punishing us," Maura muttered under her breath. "No," Emma said softly. Everyone turned to her. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "She's not punishing you. She's honoring herself. There's a difference." Cole nodded beside her. "Mom spent her whole life giving to people who never gave back. This was her way of teaching the rest of us that love isn't measured in inheritance." Mark cleared his throat and continued. "There's one more thing." Harper left a short passage to be read aloud after the will. He unfolded a small handwritten note, the one I'd written last, in my own careful script. "To everyone in this room," Mark read, "know that what I left behind reflects what I received. To those who gave love, I give love in return. To those who brought only taking, I give silence. True wealth is measured by gratitude, not blood. Family is not defined by who shares your name, but by who shares your heart." The room fell completely still. Even Maura, for all her defiance, had no response. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on Mark's desk. Rosa reached for a tissue, tears still streaming down her face. June squeezed her hand gently, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Trent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "After everything we did for her," Emma turned to him calmly. "What did you do for her, Uncle Trent?" she asked quietly. He froze, unable to answer. Maura looked down, her face tight with anger and shame. Mark stood, closing the folder. "That concludes the reading," he said. "Harper's wishes are final and legally binding." Emma and Cole stayed behind for a while after everyone else left. Rosa and June hugged them both, thanking them for letting them be part of something so meaningful. When they were gone, Emma turned to Mark. "She really planned everything, didn't she?" "Down to the last word," he said with a smile. "She wanted peace, not drama. I think she got it." Emma opened her mother's final journal entry from the box and read it softly to Cole. "True wealth is measured by gratitude." Her voice trembled, but she smiled. "That sounds just like her," she whispered. Cole nodded. It was her final lesson. Outside, the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Inside that quiet office, my words lingered long after the reading ended, not as bitterness, but as closure. For the first time, they finally understood what my silence had meant. In the end, my story wasn't about revenge, it was about value. When all was said and done, my legacy didn't lie in the estate I left behind, but in the lessons I embedded within it. Emma once told me later in her journal that after the will was read, something in the family shifted forever. Maura and Trent stopped speaking to each other for months after that day. Both tried, in their own quiet ways, to justify what had happened. Maura told distant relatives that I'd been influenced or not in my right mind, but the documents Mark provided, every note, every timestamp, every signature left no room for doubt. The truth had been written too clearly to twist. In time, even their anger faded into shame. Emma and Cole, on the other hand, took my decisions not as gifts, but as responsibilities. They sold the art pieces Daniel and I had collected over the years, and used a portion of the proceeds to start something meaningful. The Harper Foundation for Widowed Women. It wasn't large at first. Just a small organization providing grants and emotional support to women rebuilding their lives after loss, women like I once was. Rosa became one of the foundation's co-directors. Her bakery thrived, and she dedicated part of her earnings to donating pastries for every foundation event. A little sweetness for those who've tasted enough bitterness, she liked to say. June, true to her gentle soul, spent her remaining years at the lake cabin I'd left her. She turned it into a quiet retreat, where writers and artists could stay for free, a place of peace, creativity, and healing. Emma often visited her there, bringing flowers and updates about the foundation. Cole handled the legal and business side of things, making sure everything ran smoothly. The two of them had grown closer than ever. Losing me didn't divide them, it bonded them, strengthened by the example I'd set. As for Maura and Trent, their paths took different turns. Maura's obsession with appearances eventually caught up with her. She overextended herself financially, trying to maintain the image of a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Her home went up for sale within 2 years. Trent's business ventures failed one after another. The last anyone heard, he was working part-time for a company he once bragged about owning shares in. Neither of them ever spoke publicly about the will again. But occasionally, Emma said, they would send her cryptic holiday cards, short, hollow gestures of peace. She never replied. The house, the one Daniel and I had built with our own hands, remained with Emma and Cole. They didn't renovate it beyond what was necessary. They said it still felt like me inside. The walls still held laughter, and the kitchen still smelled like cinnamon during Christmas. Every December, they hosted a small dinner, never large, never extravagant. Just close friends, Rosa, June, and a few women from the foundation. They'd decorate the same tree, hang the same star at the top, and set one empty chair at the table for me. Emma would always light a candle beside it and whisper, "Merry Christmas, Mom." I like to imagine those gatherings from wherever I was, a room filled with warmth, gratitude, and the quiet kind of love that needs no explanation. That was the future I'd wanted to build all along. My story could have ended in bitterness, but it didn't. I realized too late in life that revenge, no matter how satisfying, isn't the real victory. The real triumph is living and leaving with integrity. My so-called vengeance had never truly been about taking something away from others. It was about giving myself permission to stop being used, to stop feeding ungrateful mouths while starving my own heart. If I could whisper anything into the ears of those who come after me, it would be this. Give with an open hand, but keep your boundaries closed. Love freely, but know who deserves your generosity. And never ever confuse obligation with devotion. Emma once told Mark that, the most powerful thing about my legacy wasn't the money or the property, it was the example. Mom taught us that wealth doesn't come from what you have, she said, but from how deeply you appreciate it. Those words became the Harper Foundation's motto, printed on every letterhead, every donation plaque, and every event banner. True wealth is measured by gratitude. Years later, when Emma had children of her own, she would tell them about me, not the sad parts, but the lessons. She'd tell them that her mother was a woman who gave too much until she learned what giving truly meant. That she'd turned pain into peace, and silence into strength. They would grow up hearing stories not about revenge, but about rediscovery. About how standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you whole. And as for the world beyond my family, the foundation grew far beyond what anyone expected. Within 5 years, it expanded across several states, helping hundreds of women find new homes, new jobs, and new lives. Each success story carried a piece of my name, but more importantly, a piece of my lesson. Gratitude was no longer just my personal revelation, it had become a movement. Emma once wrote in her journal, "Mom didn't leave us revenge. She left us perspective." That, more than anything, was the inheritance I'd hoped to give. So even though I wasn't there to see it, my legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every life rebuilt, every tear turned into hope. And if Maura or Trent ever heard about the foundation, and I'm sure they did, I hope, deep down, they finally understood what I'd tried to teach them. That taking without gratitude empties the soul, while giving with love fills it endlessly. My story began with disappointment and ended in peace. My heart, once weighed down by betrayal, had become light with understanding. I didn't need to haunt those who wronged me. Life had already taught them what I no longer needed to say. In the end, I wasn't remembered for the wealth I left behind, but for the wisdom that came with it. And so, at last, I gave them nothing but left the world everything.